All right. Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Awesome.
Good,
thanks for letting me know, Mads.
Yeah.
Hi, Simon. Hey, Chad.
Hey, Nick and Simon.
Hey there.
That's awesome. Everyone can see and hear me so far and also see my screen. This is great. Just doing some housekeeping here just before we begin. Some fantastic presentations on compositing inside of Red Giant. Good evening, Rob. How are you doing? Hey, Simon. There's another Simon Thompson, just for no confusion, Simon Walker. Hi, Denise.
Great name.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, so we're going to get started in just about a minute. Start right on the hour, so we're on time. And both me and Chad are very excited to be here. In fact, unlike some of the other months, which I'll cover in a second, on demystifying in post-production, we have 5 webinars this month because there are 5 Mondays in August. So excited to present a ton of content within the VFX Suite, as well as just with some Cinema 4D and After Effects workflows a little bit later this week.
Thank you, Nick, by the way, for turning up on what I discover now today is a national holiday in Canada, where you are at the moment.
Yes, I have a habit, for some reason, of turning up to these things on holidays. If you've tuned into previous weeks, but that's okay. This is kind of like my, just so everyone knows, my week to catch up on some work, because I've had some lovely holidays in the last couple of weeks up in cottage country just north of Toronto, where I live.
Sweet.
Awesome. So it's 12 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nick Harauz. I am a certified Adobe as well as a Final Cut and Avid trainer, and I'm very excited to be here. You guys are tuning into some volume training, and we've done this for a few different months now. Started back in, is it May 2020? All the way till now, August 2020, on Mondays from 12 Eastern to 1 p.m. Eastern. And this month is all about workflows for compositing inside of VFX Suite, which we're very excited to be here. And I'm joined by Chad Perkins. Hi, Chad. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good, man. A little bit later in the day than you are. I think you're just tuning in about 9 o'clock right now.
Yep.
But Chad is a fantastic instructor. In fact, one of the first books, he doesn't know this, that I read in After Effects was actually yours from several years back. Yeah, that's totally true, man. In Focal Press, when I went outside of like watching online education, your Focal Press book came up. So I got to learn After Effects a little bit from you, man.
Aww.
So yeah, very excited to be presenting with you here today. And for those of you guys, we are recording this session. It's actually recording right now. And you'll be able to check this out on the Maxon Volume Program Training. It's a YouTube channel. So you can just plug this in, and probably within a day after this webinar, if not earlier, you'll be able to watch this training session. Last but not least, there's other training going on that you should know of this week as well. Jason Hare has a webinar series. Is it Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, Simon? All about Mogurt workflows.
Right. Yep.
Using After Effects and Red Giant Universe. So if you guys have any workflows that are split between motion graphic artists and video editors, this is definitely a session you want to check out if you're in the Adobe universe, because you can save a lot of time with Mogurts, knowing how to program them with expressions, but then also all of the benefits that come with rigging certain things from Red Giant Universe Suite. Okay, and with that said, we'll continue this session also in September 2020 with the Demystifying series in post-production next month, related towards MoGraph generators, effectors, and fields, predominantly in Cinema 4D, and presented by Ellie, Matt, and Jonas. So check that out next month on Mondays as well. So
so many webinars.
So many webinars. And yeah, it's great to tune in when you can and collect all the knowledge between these incredible applications and then harnessing the power of both Cinema 4D and the Red Giant toolset. So the theme of this week, without further ado, is all about compositing color and channels. And we're going to start off talking a little bit about green screening. And I know, Chad, that you have some examples and some things that you wanted to talk about. So I'm going to change the presenter over to you. So there we have it. You should see in about a second a little notification on your screen. And okay, let's just see here if it's switched. It's great to hear also, Freddie, that you love these webinars. That's great.
It says it's showing my screen.
Simon, do you see it? Oh, you see it? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't have like any like confirmation that like this is what everybody's seeing or whatever. So I just wanted to make sure that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about green screening, and stop me if you stop hearing me or seeing me or whatever. But I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna jump in and start talking about green screening. So you know, we've seen a lot of like demos on green screening. I think like as you start learning about anything, you kind of go through you find some tutorial on green screening, and it usually makes things look super simple. There's usually like a one button solution, and then everything is perfect, and then that's the end of the tutorial. And so what I want to talk about today is kind of like what happens in real life when you're keying, because it's usually not that simple, like where you have like a one-click thing. And one of the things that I see people making, the mistakes that people make when they're keying, and actually I don't know if I would say there's a mistake. I mean, you guys can chime in if you disagree, but I mean, if you get a good key from it and it's fast, then it's the right thing to do. I think we kind of get caught up sometimes that there's like, we put ourselves on this like throne, like, oh, there's the right way to do things. And it's very kind of, I don't know, pretentious or something. If it works, it's right. But one of the techniques I think that really helps is to, especially when you have a tougher key, is when you don't try to do everything on the original layer. So oftentimes what I will do is I will make a key that's kind of like the inside of the object, and I could give that more aggressive keying settings so that we don't have any holes in the mat. And then I'll make another layer that's just the edges, and then I could have a little bit more gentle keying settings there, so I could have those combined. Another thing that I find that really helps, I'm just gonna apply Primatte here. I'm gonna be talking a little about Primatte Keyer 6, which is in the new VFX Suite. Now, for a long time, I've been a fan of Primatte, and I've used Primatte in conjunction with Keylight, and in times past, I found that there are some things that Keylight just couldn't do and some things that Primatte just couldn't do, but using both of those keyers together was really helpful for me. But Primatte Keyer 6 came out last June, and I found that I really have stopped using Keylight altogether. And I don't have any shame in saying like, oh, I would use Keylight, but for me, I find that Primatte Keyer 6 has it's like the best of both worlds for me. So this is all I use now, and I'll show you why in just a second. But one of the things that I discovered early on is that, you know, I got a Red camera about like 8 years ago, and so I would key everything on the one layer. So I'd try to just pull everything on the key of the one layer. But then what would happen is that I would make my composite, and then I would lose all the power of the red footage, because then you would, you know, render the visual effects shot, and then it would just be this compressed format. It'd be like a QuickTime or ProRes or whatever. And so instead what I started doing is still working on the visual effects before the edit is done. But then if I have the mat on a separate layer, so let's just say like, this is gonna be horrible, but I'll just click on auto define key to make a separate mat on its own. So this is not gonna turn out well, and I'll explain that in a second. But if I use a separate mat, and then I use this as a Luma mat, then I can export the mat just by itself, and then keep my red footage totally pristine. So then when I go to the color grading workflow, I still have the red footage. I'm just using the Luma key as a separate layer, which I find is really helpful. So that's my tip number one, is to don't be afraid to use other layers for your key and not have your main layer be the only layer that you're using. So I'm going to back up here and talk a little bit about Primatte, the Primatte Keyer, and why I use it and how to fiddle with it, and the advantages over the previous version of Primatte. In older versions of Primatte, they have this auto-define key button, and it was pretty cool. It would usually get good results, but it was mixed. And in this example, for whatever reason, it doesn't return a great result. But most of the time, the auto-define key button in Primatte Keyer 6 is insanely incredible. And so that's often a great way to get keys. It's somehow sensitive to soft edges. It's really great. So what I'm going to do is do this manually, and we have a tough thing here. We have a tough shot. We have a lot of little fine details. We have motion. Also, something you typically don't want to do. We have like a shallow depth of field, so we have like this blurred edge of this person, which is really challenging. But Primatte's going to help us out. So I have it selected on my eyedropper tool here, and I'm just going to click and just kind of drag around in some area. And then we get a fairly decent key usually. But what I need to do is go back and click on the background, and then just kind of like, drag around the background like a little bit more to get rid of more of the background. And then let's click on the foreground tool to say, hey, this is what we want as the foreground. But one of the things that's challenging here, I'm just going to keep adding some more and more stuff to the foreground. But one of the things that's challenging with all keys is, like I mentioned, I like to have like an inside mat that's just like a solid mat. Like you use like a garbage mat. I guess it'd be the opposite of a garbage mat, a precious mat, we might call it, where like we have a mat on the inside of our object, and like the stuff that we definitely want to keep. And in quick keying tutorials, we see garbage mats all the time, or the precious mats all the time, of stuff that we want to keep. But what you don't see is how difficult those precious mats are in real life, because what happens is, especially as you have stuff like this where there are challenges. Let's see, where were we just at here? Where we have stuff where we have like this, where we have like holes that happen inside the mat. So like technically I'd want my precious mat holding on to this finger, but not holding on to this little hole right there. And so we would have to kind of like dynamically shift our precious mat all the time. And that can be really frustrating. Or stuff like this where there's some I'm gonna solo this layer here. And then you can kind of see that it seems like it's fine, but then as I select the transparency here, we can see that actually there's a lot of this kind of like mesh that's kind of like actually being seen through. So we want to hold on to all of this stuff. Now, what's really, really, really amazing about Primatte Keyer 6 is there's this thing called a core mat. And this is basically like the precious mat that I've been joking about, because this will allow us to kind of automatically keep the stuff on the inside of the key. So we don't have to create that precious mat that holds on to the inside stuff. And the magic of that is that it's procedural. It's a procedurally generated mat based on your content. So when I go back to my fingers, like it's automatically creating a mat where my fingers are as they're moving, like the inside of my object. And I have settings here where I can like blur the core mat, or I can erode the core mat, or take away the erosion of the core mat. It's just incredible. And if that's like the only thing you get out of this tutorial today is that there's this core mat feature in Primatte Keyer 6, then I will feel like I've done my job. I probably will feel like I could have done more, but I still I feel good about that part of things. Okay, I'm gonna unsolo this. And then we also have these other tools where we can just like click on this like spill sponge and be like, okay, I'm just gonna like get rid of some of the green on these areas. And I could click here to decrease the opacity. So if I have some fine details that are being eroded away, I can click on that and get some of that back. And I could also restore detail if it's getting lost, and I have all these options. And also what's really great too is that down here we have the matte blur. so I can soften the edges of my matte, and also I can shrink the matte by dragging it down. And what's so great about this is that the details, the controls are so fine. So like I can crank this to a really high value, and they're really, really subtle controls. And the last thing I want to talk about is that there's matte black point and white point, which is similar to what we have in Keylight. So if I want to compress the transparency, then I would increase the black point. If I want to restore more detail, I decrease the white point. And in that way, I can have total control over my key. And then this is exactly why I find myself not really using Keylight anymore. And also, of course, we have the spill killer, which we can enable to remove any other green elements on the edges. So we have a pretty great key. I think I would fiddle with this a little bit more because there are some challenges here, but we have a pretty decent key pretty quickly. And you can see like little tiny details like this little, like thread from this thing are coming across perfectly. And really that's the magic of Primatte Keyer 6 for me. So anyways, that's my little spiel on green screening for the moment. And Nick, I'm gonna turn it back over to you, and if you have any other like.
Yeah, no, I actually had a question for you, Chad. Just like with your experience with green screens that have come up, and one of those is, you know, I love the idea of this promise of a green screen. So this is kind of coming back from my education, where I always believed it to be this like mystical thing that you could key out, you know, the first time. And through my own experience, when I filmed, I had a Canon XL1, if you remember those cameras back in the day, that shot 411, and thought I could, like, you know, easily key out the color green, like no problem, like no need to set up things. So there's this like, I think this is promise of a green screen always coming out great, but the problem is a lot of times several cameras, even still out there today, shoot somewhat compressed. They're getting way better, but this can like complicate the green screen process. So I was wondering if you could speak towards your own experience with dealing with green screens and some of the things that you, through your knowledge, have overcome through dealing with them quite often.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I've noticed that I have to do sometimes, especially with compressed footage, is that like I need to prep it first. So like just jumping in and like tossing like a key solution on it, like doesn't always get the best results. I did this one shot that I actually have queued up here. Cool. Let's see if I can, well, I don't know if I could get to the original shot in a timely manner that's not super boring, but when I shot this, there was actually like moire in the green screen. Like I shot it outdoors, and my monitor, I couldn't see it. I couldn't tell that this was there. But then like just because of like the fabric of something, I don't know what it was, but it created this like weird like moire pattern. And if we had like indefinite time, I would show like how Primatte Keyer 6 handled this really well, blah, 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 whatever. But when I was doing this a few years ago, and I just had the old version of Primatte and Keylight, man, I had a heck of a time. So what I had to do is actually go into DaVinci Resolve and do like a secondary color correction to isolate these other like types of green, and then color correct them to be more in line with the regular green. And then I got a much, much better key than I could the other way. So like sometimes like I have to do stuff like that where I will prep the files first, maybe like a colors or curves or levels adjustment to get things more contrasty. It seems like that can help as well. But yeah, that's another reason why doing the separate keys helps, because on the secondary key, like if I'm using another layer, then I could use like curves and be like super like high contrast with the look of things, and that really makes the green screen pop. And then I'll put the keying tool after my curves adjustment, and it doesn't really matter if I'm doing it too much, because I'm just trying to create a matte. I'm not trying to create the look. So like this is like too much contrast for this shot, but this is fine for getting the Luma key.
Chad, we just had a question from Mac. Could you show the alpha for the key that you just made, or like turn on the matte inside Primatte?
I can do that. So here's the solo, and then here's the transparent thing like that, and then this is just the alpha there. So I didn't take the time to go and polish this up a little bit more, but I would have done that.
Fantastic, thank you. It's all about the alpha, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was cleaning up the foreground, and I didn't take the time to do that. I was just trying to get the edges, but yeah. So even with the core mat, I should point out this, like even with the core mat, you still have to kind of do some like tweaking of settings and such like that. So it's not this like one stop, like you click this button and all of a sudden like everything on the inside of your core is perfectly, you know, opaque or whatever.
Cool, very cool. So I have to compliment you, Chad, just an example of sort of a green screen workflow that I was going to show, and then just talk about some like basic color theory before we dive deeper into some color stuff. But I wanted to show an example that actually comes from some of like a red giant example here, but what I thought was super cool, and bringing it together with a little bit of the VFX Suite.
Sweet.
Awesome. If you don't mind just handing over. Actually,
just while you're switching over screens, Christine has made an excellent comment about the spill killer inside Primatte 6, the latest version, and now you can turn it completely off. So you don't have to do the spill killing with Primatte. You can do it with a completely different color correction tool if you like. Christine knows because she's the product manager of VFX Suite, so this is a good reminder for us. I personally found the spill killer to be one of the best mechanisms for doing this, but it's a great it's a great idea.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons, just real quick, but like one of the reasons that I used Primatte originally is that when you do key light, a lot of times it's set to like intermediate color by default or whatever it is, or like the final result. And it's when it tries to do its spill killing, it tends to make things like really, really noisy. And the spill killing inside Primatte to me is like infinitely cleaner. I don't know what the algorithm is or how that science works, but I think the spill killing inside Primatte, I mean, it's really cool that you could turn it on and off, of course, but like for me, I think the spill killing in Primatte works really, really well.
Absolutely, yes. That's been my experience.
That's awesome. I'm just trying to switch over the presentation to my screen, but it doesn't seem to be taking. Chad, can you do that on your end?
Yeah, I clicked change presenter to you and then confirmed that.
Actually, you chose me, Chad. It sent to me, so I said no. So if you send it to Nick again, yeah.
But okay. So I have, sorry, for make presenter, I have two Maxon red giant options. So I'm not sure which one is which.
Oh, hold on. Does everyone see my screen now? There seems to be a little bit of a delay, but how's it going now?
Hold on. Your screen, Nick, a moment.
Wait. What about now?
I'm just seeing a title card.
It says showing.
Yeah, we just got the typing out at the moment.
Can I stop showing my screen? Would that give it back to you?
Yeah, try
you
stop
have showing your screen.
Oh, that's true. Okay, I'm gonna try Nick again.
Oh, hold on. Let's see. I'm showing my screen now. Can you guys see my After Effects composition?
I can't.
No. No, we still just got the title card.
Interesting. So, Chad, why don't I hand it back over to you for 1 second? I'm just going to try logging in and out.
Okay.
If you can just go back to your presentation screen, and I will then cover. It actually works out well because the green screen example I'm showing is a sort of an overall, unless it works now, an overall combination of like green screen and some of the compositing in VFX Suite. So it fills really nicely into your compositing with color if you continued with it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Also, Chad, we had a quick question from Yishai, who said, would you mind just quickly covering that concept of the two layers about how you make a matte rather than using the actual key on your log footage?
Yes, and I'll take the time to do that in like I apologize. It's kind of like a more in-depth conversation that I'm kind of like running through really quick. But essentially, it kind of looks like this. So I might make like the precious mat, the opposite of the garbage mat. I don't know. Core mats are the real actual term, but like core doesn't really convey, you know, the opposite of garbage. So I might have one mat that's like this, that's kind of like the inside of the object, and then I might have like a separate layer that's like the opposite of that, that's just the edges. So I have one that's kind of just the edges and one that's just the core. And so on this internal one, I can have much more aggressive settings because as I showed you before, the alpha, you know, it's not perfect and the core should be completely white. Like that, this stuff should be completely opaque. And then we want more gentle keying settings for this stuff on the edges where there can be like some gray and softer details. And so typically this is how I would work, where you'd have, again, more gentle keying settings. You can keep the fine edges and the hairs and stuff like that on the edges. And then you have really aggressive keying settings on the core mat so that you don't have any holes in the middle. So this is like typically what I would do for the workflow. But again, these tools in Primatte are making it so that like I'm doing this less and less often because I could have this core mat and just fiddle with this right here. And again, it's procedural. So like as you know, the person moves her fingers here, and there's like little spaces and gaps, you know, the core mat is adjusting automatically as it's moving. So I don't have to try to like rotoscope my precious mat, the core mat. It's already like dynamically being done for me by Primatte, which is like a miracle. That's really, really incredible.
Nice.
Thank you for the question, and apologies for not explaining that very well the first time. Just kind of ran through that like a. Oh, I guess I have this example that I could have used, where this is how I broke up this shot, because I did this shot like 7 years ago or something like that. So I have one that's like the hair, and then I have another one that's like the body. And so sometimes it's you want to create like a core mat on an object like that, and sometimes you want to create a mat for the edges, but then sometimes like her hair was the only soft details, and then these edges of her body can have a little bit more of an aggressive key because there's not these fine details. So I might separate a key into multiple layers for that reason.
Great. I think we're having trouble getting Nick back. I think he's having internet issues.
Oh no.
So it might be a good idea to jump into that next section that you had planned to do with him.
Okay. Well, hey,
if we can get back.
This is one of the things I want to share really quick about keying that I didn't think I'd have time for. So bonus. So I want to show you how to key like a lot of visual effects footage. So I was kind of learning how to do explosions for us. So this is an explosion that I actually helped make, and I shot this with my own camera. It's one of the cool benefits of being a visual effects artist. Sometimes you get to be almost blown up and look at really cool fire and stuff like that. But then how do you pull a key on this? So like here's like the background, and I want to have this explosion. And there's a couple different methods out there that are known. So one of them is the set matte effect. And so what I can do for the set matte effect is I can, because this is an explosion that's kind of like pretty much like a red thing, I can change the use for matte to the red channel, and then I'm using the red channel for the matte. And so you pull like an instant key that's usually pretty clean, and that's pretty magical. That's a great thing if you're not used to it. That's a cool, a really awesome thing. And it's much better than using like the add mode or whatever, because it gets rid of too much stuff. And then this really isn't like partially transparent, just the edges are. So it gets a much better result, but then we lose a lot of our smoke and whatnot. So what also we can do, and we can combine these two, is by using the extract effect. So the extract effect is kind of like what Lumetri used to be. It's kind of like the new version of Lumetri. And so what I can do here is kind of like just clip the pure black and then pull back on the bottom one here to give us a little bit more kind of like you know, easing on that. So we have like some of that dark area, but we have kind of like a softer end stuff. So then, you know, we could have extract on one layer, set matte on another layer. So we have almost like, again, like the 2 matte thing, where we have set matte as like the core matte of our explosion, and then extract is kind of like the feathered edges of our explosion. We could dial those in, and then we could, you know, adjust the opacity or the blend mode of these 2 layers independently if we made them separate layers. So that's a fun little thing that can be done as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm back.
Oh,
Chad,
hey, Nick.
good timing. Yeah, I wanted to add on. I just caught a little bit about your extract and the old Lumetri, and a lot of the times Adobe, I believe they put a name next to Lumetri now, where it basically says it's been deprecated, and the only reason that it's still in the suite is that when you open up an older After Effects project, if someone's used the Lumetri, you're able to use and see that effect. But extract, like you just demonstrated, is a great way of a modern day being able to key out a Lumetri with a lot more control, like you just showed.
Yeah, that's cool. I like extract. It gets me out of some jams sometimes.
Yes.
Could I switch this over to you now, Nick? I feel like I've been hogging up my time, and I feel like
no, totally. And I'm excited to give this a try where it's going to work this time.
Okay.
So yeah, just send it back over to me, and I'll let you know when I see a message come up.
Okay.
I haven't quite seen anything yet in terms of being able to take over a screen. So let me just, there we go.
Okay, we'll give it a minute then.
Yeah,
I'm still seeing this live.
I said show my screen. There we go.
Woohoo!
Let me just see. I want to make sure. Can everyone see me moving my current time indicator around?
I can.
Yes.
I just want to make sure it was in real time and I wasn't too delayed. That is awesome. Great. So I kind of wanted to add to some of the green screen workflows that you've been doing, Chad, and I just wanted to show sort of a final example of something I'm going to try to achieve a few steps in, which ties in the Primatte Keyer with a little bit of VFX Suite. So it's a nice little bridge. So this is the final example here. And what I'll say is that this person was shot on a green screen. You've then got your background plate, which is actually still. And then there's a number of compositing elements, fire and mist here to be example. And I do want to mention that we'll cover some of these brighter glows in more detail in another week, but wanted to touch upon sort of solving a few of these compositing problems. So I'm here, and I'll just want to show you what I started with. So I'm going to turn off the actual mask that's on here, as well as I'm going to turn off Primatte Keyer. So this is the original shot. And there were a few things that I wanted from the shot for the background, which I'm going to solo right now so you guys can see it. This is the background, and originally the background itself did not move. So it was just a static image. So on one level, I wanted to extract certain bits of data, primarily from Primatte, from this green screen to apply to the still plate. And then on another end, want to tie everything together and make it look realistic, although the colors are somewhat different. So on one level, what I did was took out through a garbage mat using just the regular mask tools inside of After Effects to define the parts of the green screen that I didn't need. The next part was, and this was just through a few steps, I used Primatte Keyer to, let's just solo this layer by itself without the background, to pretty much key the subject and get a fairly decent key with a few different clicks here and there. Now, once I was able to achieve the key, and this was also with enabling a little bit of green screen killer directly with the Primatte Keyer. And unlike some of your examples, Chad, this doesn't go too much into dealing with some of those problematic edges that you might experience with certain material, or even semi-translucent areas. But where I thought this was a nice bridge is the fact that we have to use a garbage mat and also maintain tracking data. And this example was rather simple. In fact, I used, in this instance, the built-in After Effects tracker to achieve the final result. So if I just sort of turn off the mask here. And I'm just going to press U to reveal on this layer the tracking points. If everyone sees the tracking points here, this was just using After Effects' built-in tracker on the layer level to track those 2 tracking points. And you should know that in an example like this, where you have a slight difference and variation of greens on your green screen, they make ideal tracking points with After Effects' built-in engine. But you want to, when working with this tracker, the one thing you want to keep in mind, as I just sort of move it here in the interface, is that you can do a few things to edit the options in the way that it tracks. So After Effects by default does it tracking luminance, but in an example where you have extremely strong colors like red, green, or blue, RGB might work well for your track as well. And that's exactly what I used in this example to hop on and grab the tracking data. Okay, so let me just hop
Can I
back
add
to
in
the
a comment here, Nick?
Yeah.
Just about the question that's come up on sometimes that we've done this is, what's the difference between green tracking markers like we have here and the difference between orange tracking markers? And without being too facetious, green ones are easier to key out. So it depends on what you need them for. And it's very popular to have orange, and in lots of behind the scenes footage, you'll see on movies that there's a lot of usage of orange tracking markers. But pragmatically, unless you need to transfer those over to, say, a 3D program where you're doing a whole series of batch moves, it's much easier to be able to then combine either one pass of Primatte, which is typically what you need to do. It looks like you've done this with one pass to get rid of those tracking markers. Or you could, if you had to have orange ones, you could use something like Spot Clone Tracker from VFX to actually then eliminate those after you've tracked them. But I just wanted to mention that because that's been a popular topic of late about what type of color to have for your background tracking markers.
Hey, Nick, I have a question about that.
Sure.
Do you have like any tips for like getting rid of those tracking markers? Because I feel like I've seen tutorials and I've seen people like do stuff like that where they have like the green tracking markers, and that's what I use. I have like green gaffer tape, and I feel like when I'm trying to key those out that like I'm missing something, because I feel like everyone else has a really easy time with it, but when I do it, it's like it gives me so much grief. And so I'm wondering if you had like any like super quick tips off the top of your head of like, here's how to remove green screen tracking markers if you're having a tough time with it, like Chad does all the time.
No, that's a great question. I mean, in terms of this example, like Simon had mentioned, there wasn't a lot of difference between the tracking markers, but in an example where it would be orange, I've actually used just a few of the various color tools inside of After Effects to simply just kind of key out that color. In some instances, Chad here, I'm just going to kind of bring out some of the keying options here in After Effects. In the past, I have been successful with a second pass of key light when identifying the orange color to remove it, but it's a second pass. In certain examples, what I've done on a second pass is desaturate the orange color to kind of remove that color, and that actually helped to key it out with the use of an extraction. Basically, it was a desaturation followed by a increase in threshold for those particular isolated trackers, followed by a keying device. But
okay, so do you
it all depends on the footage is the best way to describe. And there's sometimes where it's been easier than others, and it usually has to do with the way that it's shot.
Okay.
I've got a couple of comments on that as well, Chad.
Sure.
On shots like that, I found that an extra sample of the background in Primatte usually manages to cope with the different types of green. And also we had a question about the shapes, and some people have asked why they are crosses, and is there a reason why that is so specific for that? I just wonder if you could both just talk about that. I think it's to do with just making them more trackable.
Yeah,
I think the various is because they're a little bit more trackable, and I can speak to definitely the size of them being small. is that ideally, depending on the tracker that you use, the first thing that it will latch onto is luminance or contrast, which I think is one of the reasons why orange and green are used, is because of that variance or that color. It could make it easier to track, but not to key, if you follow me. On an instance of the crosshair shape, a lot of tools that you do use have the same type of crosshair symbol in certain features, so I think that there might be a connection towards that, and easier to catch on to just because of the actual shape and the difference in color varying from the color of green or blue to that tracking point. Chad, did you have something to add?
It's an interesting thing. A few years ago, I don't know if this is still applicable, but like the Visual Effects Society put out like this, the VES Handbook of Visual Effects, which is like, they kind of just like went out to the whole organization. They're like, all right, what are the rules? And they have all these rules about like this shape, like to be the perfect track, it should be like this kind of shape and this kind of cross, plus also this kind of cross or whatever. But I find that like it doesn't matter as much. I think it's mostly important that you're not having like straight lines, that you're having just like a lot of edge. Like trackers seem to like corners of things, and so like if you have like a lot of like corners and stuff like that, I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Okay, awesome. So just kind of continuing with this example, so everyone saw that the tracking data, this was all from After Effects, or just the 2-point scale, and position and rotation. And what I did is I took it and then applied it to the still background and ended up with this motion. Now, usually, because this background is receding, ideally, I don't want it to shake as much as the foreground tracking points, although it is behind the subject, but I might want to have a little bit less shake. So sometimes achieving that could be repositioning your layer in Z space to sort of bring it behind the subject to get rid of some of the shake that is occurring. But what I found most interesting about this scene is that there's a lot of foreground action here. Wouldn't you agree, Chad, in terms of color differences? There's like a flashing light with the subject. And I was like, okay, well, this same like flashing light experience is gonna have to take place on the background as well. Ideally that's what we want, but it definitely not. So I actually, for this, used a built-in After Effects tool to essentially reference the light and the color from this particular foreground object. So I'll just show it to you here in Effects and Presets. It's called Color Link. And I learned this trick from a fellow trainer, Aaron Stern. I'm sure you guys have heard of him he runs a show called After Effects Weekly on LinkedIn Learning, and also speaks at a bunch of conferences. But the whole idea is that you place this color link effect on a layer. In this case, I've placed it on the wrong item. I'm going to place it on the background. So let me just cut that and paste it. And I'm going to reference the aliens blast here. So hold on, let me just make sure the color is on. I'll reference the aliens blast. Let's just solo this out so you guys can see it. And right now the sample is set to average, but you can see here, although we can't see the actual background layer, it is picking up the variance of the color in the other shot. And what you could do, I mean, in this case, it tends to be there's a lot of brightness where those variations are taking place. So what I did was I set this to brightness. You can see more of that orange leaking through now. And then I used a specific blend mode to mix it in to the actual background layer. It's a little extreme here with overlay, but you can of course dial it back to taste with the opacity control on the color link.
Dude,
so I found this like to be an awesome tool, which I, in past or previous experience, I've never used color link. So there you have it, just a great kind of built-in.
That's a great tip.
That's phenomenal.
Really good. It's automated as well.
Yeah, it's automated, and like you got blend mode choices, which is so cool. So you've got now like a little bit of blinking, and we can now take this and then do some, further compositing. So in talking about the composite, like color correction can take a number of levels, but when we talk about matching the colors of two layers that are stacked, ideally we'd probably perform some color correction on each layer. then we would try to unify the correction of those objects, and potentially, depending on a colorist workflow, then even do a final pass after that. So the idea here was I did some color correction using the Lumetri color tool inside of After Effects, for the only reason that I'm primarily trained or have been trained first in video editing. So tools like Lumetri are more familiar with me, or have a familiar base for a few reasons. But one, I just know color wheels. So having color wheels as a tool that I've used in the past makes me feel very comfortable in this tool. Not to mention that the fact that it's shared between both Premiere Pro and After Effects has its use cases if we started something out inside of Premiere. But here I just made a basic correction to sort of darken the scene and bring down some of the saturation using the Lumetri color tool. But this isn't the only tool you can use. In fact, Chad, what do you usually use for color correction of most objects or layers inside of After Effects?
I use curves. I'm a curves guy. I feel like that's my jam.
Yeah, and curves could be awesome for a number of things, and plus there's shortcuts built into curves to highlight each of the various channels. Now with Lumetri, there is a curves built in as well, but you don't get those same type of shortcut treatments for the adjustment. So then we have the color link, and I'll kind of head back to the main project here, where we can sort of see some of the color looking in. There's some super basic correction done here with the foreground object. And this is actually a MOV file from Particular. I'll get into other sources of Fire, or I think as we go through this week. But the whole idea is that I want to do some final correction with all of these layers and assets directly inside of Supercomp. So to show a few things with that, one way that you can send things to Supercomp is, the easiest way in my opinion, is selecting them. And then from the Effect menu, heading to the RG VFX Suite and then choosing Supercomp. And what's cool about this method of doing it is that with those selected layers, they already become a part of the new Supercomp. And we can take advantage of all of its amazing tools for color correction and bringing all of the layers together into a final composite or example. Now, recently, there's been, in the last release, is it VFX Suite 1.5, Simon, if I'm getting that correct, in terms of the number?
That's
Chad?
right, yes. Yep.
There's a new feature that was brought into the sole color correction tool that's part of VFX Suite, which is, if I click on the plus icon here, you've got your color correction tool, which you could apply to any layer. And if you work with color wheels, you'll feel right at home, where I could bring down, of course, the black levels of my subject to kind of give a more moody scene. Maybe even bring down the exposure a bit too, depending on what I'm looking for. But in my favorite button is here, which is this match background tool. And I'll show some other examples depending on time. But what this is going to do is it's going to take a look at the background, and it's going to help match it to that background scene and the colors in the background scene. The best part is, if it's too strong, let's say like as in this example, you have separate control for mixing in the black and the white point. So if I wanted to only take 50% of the black point, matching that black point, I could lower that adjustment. I could also increase the white or back off from that percentage. But this could easily sort of unify these two items together. The other thing I wanted to mention here is also the fire. And a lot of times you might get composite elements from a website that include this black background. Chad, do you usually have, when you get these sort of composite elements such as fire or fog, are they usually on a black background, or do you get them pre-keyed?
It's about 50-50.
It's about 50-50 depending on who's supplying it to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, one thing that I love about Supercomp is that we could have taken this fire layer, and sometimes what people will do in a general composite, here I'll just put it on the background so you guys can see this without Supercomp being shown. And that is, you could take this and change its blend mode to an add or a screen. And you can sort of see the way that the fire looks is not that believable for a few reasons. The brightest spots aren't being maintained right now. In fact, this whole object itself has a little bit of transparency through it, where really with the fire, we want it to be somewhat opaque in the brighter areas. And the other thing is we sort of want it to create potentially a little bit of distortion and affect both our foreground and our background layer. One great thing about Supercomp, in my opinion, is that you can flag a layer, although this one's not flagged automatically as a additive layer. Because of the background, you can sort of see some of the differences in the way that looks, but even more so that there are dedicated effects to compositing this in the scene. And there's two that I wanted to mention. One is, if I click on the plus button, for fire, is that even fooling around with these tools that you have here first, if we go to presets, there are ones specifically built for both fire and fog that you should take into consideration. And what I'll do is I'll kind of head to the bottom to pyrotechnics and just choose this prismatic heat, just to show you, did you guys see what happened there? I'll just sort of disable all these effects. But this one preset has done a bunch of things. One is it's shining the light of the fire here on the background, as well as it's shining the light of the fire here on the foreground object as well, which really does kind of tie these objects a little bit better together. Last but not least is the glow that is presented by the fire is kind of helping it shine on the foreground objects. The optical glow that's here versus layer glow is going to interact with other layers in your scene. And then we could take these items that are together and further enhance them by unifying the edges a little bit here of our foreground object. So let me actually come here to the plus icon and add to this normal layer something that is called light wrap. And light wrap is another great coloring tool, which by default is super non-aggressive, which is nice. The fact is that you usually want light wrap to not be so aggressive, but right now the background elements are wrapping around the edges of our subject here. And to really see this, I'll just crank up this number to 100%, because sometimes when I first look at it, I really don't see a change. But if I draw your attention to the top of the gun here, did you guys see the change that took place with that effect? Let me just disable it for you and enable it. So you can sort of see now the light of the background wrapping around the subject. So you've got an amount and a method that you can play with, as well as you can limit this to just being the highlights only on the subject. But what's great about light wrap, and to also draw an online example from Stu Maschowitz, he has an example of a character or that he puts on the Star Wars background. Chad, do you remember this too? And it just
with the walkers on the water.
I believe it's with the walkers on the water. Yes.
Yeah, with the harbor thing. Yeah, that was awesome.
And he shows like the variation between two backgrounds and how light wrap itself could really influence the way a character looks. He literally cuts out one character and moves them to just another part of the frame, and how dramatically that actually could affect your interpretation of the subject in the foreground.
It's all those subtle details that really sell it, aren't they? The small little things that we don't notice in real life, but they make such a big difference when you're looking at a composite and you don't necessarily know why it looks different or why it looks less real. But it's all those different small effects combined, I think, that makes it for a much better composite, as you're just pointing out.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, so Supercomp is managing this whole thing right now, this layer here at the top. It's taken those 3 layers that I selected and then placed it to Supercomp. And while this composite isn't done, we can continue with unifying these objects by doing even further final correction to unify them with various tools within After Effects, as well as even bringing in elements such as grain. But Chad, I know that you have, our time is almost up. I know that you have some other examples too, so I wanted to hand it back over to you so I don't suck up all the time as well.
Thanks, man. That's really incredible stuff. I'm thinking rather, because like what I was going to talk about next is like curves and compositing with color curves and color channels. And I'm thinking that maybe we should end it here, then pick up curves next week, because it feels like talking about digging into something like curves in like 5 minutes feels like it wouldn't, just based on my previous experience of how well I explained keying is with separate layers.
Gotcha.
I'm assuming that like I'm not, I mean, I could, but like, what do you guys think? I'm thinking maybe like we tack on the color channel stuff next week.
That's probably a good idea, because I got another couple of comments that I wanted to mention about, or somebody asked a question, Leovort asked a question about processing speed as well. So I got a couple of comments about that within Supercomp. And I think you're right, Chad. It's probably better to do justice to curves and then have a longer conversation rather than just dashing it off, because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
But it's worth pointing out, as Jonah has asked, will this webinar be uploaded as a tutorial later on? Yes, in a few hours' time, you'll be able to see it on the Maxon Volume Program Training YouTube channel as the recording, and you'll get that link as part of the email follow-up automatically. But to answer Levota's question, and apologies for mispronouncing your name, they were asking, do you recommend rendering and replacing footage after each use of Supercomp? And they're saying, not sure if it's my computer, but it tends to get laggy after using it. Well, what you can find is that you got many different layers making up a comp, and you can also, of course, have pre-comps as well as those layers, so you can combine them. So two little tricks that I found work. One is that, Nick, I wonder if you bring up your project file area and then on the top left of your machine, because we're looking at your screen at the moment. So if you just clicked on project there, and then right click on one of the compositions in the comps folder. I just wanted to point out making a proxy. So if you create a proxy for a particular layer that you're not going to then change, especially if it's like Trapcode, fire or dust or smoke or something like that, that can get you faster scrubbability, so you're not having to reprocess every frame in the background, especially if you're happy with that effect. That's one thing I use quite a lot. But in terms of the processing, Supercomp processes everything on the GPU automatically, and it processes and combines all those layers together. And I've been doing some tests based on my relatively new, my 6-month-old MacBook Pro, and that has got a Radeon card on it. That's got here we go, Radeon Pro Vega with 4 gigs of memory on it. And I've been doing tests on that one on my late 2019 MacBook Pro, and I've also been doing tests with a Dell 7540 with an NVIDIA RTX 4000 card with 8 gigs of video RAM on it. And I have to say that the Dell machine is twice as fast for processing these things. So it really is a case of the faster your graphics card, the more you'll be able to deal with those processes live, and you'll more be able to get near real-time playback or rendering in After Effects if you've just got a faster card. So it's a simple answer, but throwing more power at it. And certainly the RTX 4000 it's not the most expensive card you can get, but it's a pretty decent card for the trade-off that you get about the faster processing I've found.
Hey, Simon, I have a question about that. Because once you send a layer to Supercomp, then the layer exists in Supercomp and doesn't need to exist in your timeline, right? So if you turn off the layer in your timeline, do we know if that gives you like a performance boost? Because it won't affect the visuals, right? Because if it's existing in Supercomp, you can turn it off. And does that speed things up at all?
I haven't tested that. The theory is that it's all about the screen blitting, what After Effects is doing to actually render something to the screen. And so because
Oh,
Supercomp
okay.
is taking over completely that process, that I haven't noticed a difference between having them switched off or switched on, because effectively everything is being routed through Supercomp, so it doesn't have to do that process in the background. But it's worth a test. I could try it out.
Because After Effects has like kind of like a long-standing reputation of processing stuff that it doesn't need to process entirely. So I would be curious to see if like they, if how that works. Because I mean, because another thing too is that not every layer goes to Supercomp, right? So it still has to process other things in the comp.
Well,
So
if any layer above Supercomp will process absolutely, and then you can then have effects on that Supercomp layer as well, which then process further down the effects stack. So later on in the effects processing. So it's worth a try. I think a combo of the Proxy and the faster graphics card will probably give you most value. And I've got a question also: is the Intel i9 chip going to be working? It's like, yes. This is another sitting on the fence answer, isn't it? Yes, the faster CPU you've got as well, because at the same time After Effects needs to do a number of things in the CPU as well as the GPU, because it's doing multiple processing whenever it's rendering a frame. So the quick answer is the faster the GPU and faster the CPU you can put in your machine, the better. And it depends on the eGPUs as well. I've noticed that After Effects has begun to support multiple eGPUs, especially for export. So if you've got one of those and you can put an external card in it, like in a Sonnet chassis, certainly on the Mac, then that could help you speed things up. But as far as on Windows, my experience is that the best process is to just route it through the most powerful card you can put in your machine.
Awesome.
I've just noticed a question from Greg saying, what about eGPU? So I preempted your question there, Greg. But that's
Simon,
not just my opinion. I've been chatting to people like NVIDIA about this as well, and they're also making that suggestion, even if you've got a tower system.
So fascinating to see how great performance is getting on systems with the new chips coming out. That's for sure.
yeah,
absolutely.
So I saw just a quick question I wanted to answer through the thread, Simon. And if this was answered, I apologize, but there was a question about when you add light wrap, does it take all of the background layers into account? So that was like the fire and also the background. I just wanted to sort of disable the light wrap effect for a second and draw your attention to the lower left of the subject, where you should see that that the fire is affecting, right? Or it's taking both of those background layers into account with the light wrap, which is kind of sweet, without it being pre-composed. And we've talked a lot about green screening too, and there was a question about any tips for dealing with bad green screens. My tip, first of all, is if you can find a friend to do it, go for it. If not, usually it's best to think about a green screen. To me, this is from how I've dealt with some problematic green screens, to deal with a green screen in pieces. So rather than thinking of dealing with it as a whole, you use masks in separate areas to deal with the variation of color in order to, and then you combine it together using a bunch of compositing tricks. I know for myself that someone who's helped me through green screen compositing in After Effects is a trainer by the name of Mark Christensen. He has some pretty awesome tutorials specifically with dealing with green screen composites on LinkedIn, and you could also bring these tricks into Primatte Keyer 6 to keep the core mat and then deal with edges separately. But because every green screen is separate and it's going to be a separate quality, it's really hard to answer generally, but that's the way that I think about it. Chad, did you have something to add?
I mean, I'm just kind of like, regurgitating what I said already, but taking it into processing before you key can make a big difference for a really big difference for my experience. So like, you know, sometimes you might need to saturate or do color adjusting to get things in the right space. You might need to do like a passive like denoising or whatever, and that can make a really big difference in your key. So just jumping straight into keying and trying to handle all problems with the keyer sometimes isn't the best solution from my perspective. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of color grading, a little bit of whatever to kind of like polish it up and get it ready.
It depends also on which particular tool you're using. That's been the case for the older versions of Keylight in After Effects, Chad. I totally agree. The Primatte 6 algorithm was actually organized so that it would key better on uncorrected footage, even on log footage, because then it could look directly at the video channels inside the footage. But your point about denoising is a good one as well, because of the macro blocking that can be introduced, especially on lower lit areas of the screen. So if you're using Primatte, then the best policy is to color correct after the key in that effect stack. Apart from denoiser, if you've got denoiser from Magic Bullet Suite, that's really great at being able to edit out some of those blocky edges you get typically on the edge of, say, hair when you're dealing with something which has had that macro blocking introduced because of either low light or low sensor, or the fact that it was shot on an iPhone and so on.
Well, yeah, I should also point out too, thank you, Simon, that's amazing. I don't think I knew that about Primatte Keyer, but I will say that this clip that I've been using that I keyed out here, and this is one I took a little bit more time with, but you're seeing like a lot of really fine details, and this is like uncorrected, ungraded. See, like the Primatte Keyer 6 is applied straight to the footage. And I don't think this is like log technically, but it's extremely, extremely flat footage and completely untouched. So Primatte handled that like a champ. Is amazing.
That's awesome.
Nice. And I love your tip then about that matte effect and being able to just add a track matte and then use that as the key, if you like, without affecting the original image. That thing you showed right at the beginning. Love that tip.
Thanks. Thanks.
I just noticed we've 5 minutes over. So you were absolutely right, Chad, to not mention about curves, because we just filled up 8 minutes talking about everything except curves. So this is definitely something that we can add in on the next session, and that's the whole point about these, to be able to answer questions that people are asking, and to deliberately go off tangent sometimes, because that's what production life is like, and this is why we've organized these as a series of these webinars rather than just single self-standing ones. But I'll hand over to you to do the wrapping up, Nick.
Yes, no, it's amazing, as I was saying, how fast an hour goes, and talking about all these things compositing. And I think, as I've mentioned, that we'll be continuing this next Monday with further talks about compositing, specifically within After Effects and using VFX Suite, also with Chad Perkins. So thanks so much for being here, Chad, and sharing your wisdom with everybody. It's amazing.
My pleasure. Yeah, you too. It's been great. Color Link. I'm learning stuff all the time. It's great.
Yeah, and yeah, these will be available on that volume training program. It should be a link in the chat, and if not, I'll figure out some way of sharing it with the audience that attended so that you guys can access this. And don't forget Jason Harauz.
Can you show your page? Sorry, Nick. Can you just show the page that it's on? Can you just go back over to your browser?
Sorry, the browser's shut down, but I can easily bring up one of those links. This is Demystifying series.
You can go to YouTube and just type in Maxon volume training program.
No, I got it up.
Here they are. Great.
Here's the page, and there's quite a lot of different workflows here. Cinema 4D, VFX Suite. You've got Universe, and the list goes on and on.
Loads of stuff there.
Yep.
And also, if you've got a team, if you've got a team, you can feel free to reach out to us and to have a custom session like this, specifically designed to the workflows that you're using, and that's complementary with team licenses. So you can let us, if you're interested in that, let us know at training@maxon.net.
And I wanted to just thank everyone here in the audience for sticking with us. It means a lot, and hopefully everyone has learned some stuff about compositing, and we can't wait to see you next week.
Woo.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Thanks for the nice comments as well. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks,
Very
Matt.
appreciated.
Thanks, Mac. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Kent.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.